When somebody walks through the door, you owe them a debt of gratitude if they're going to work in your organization. Even if they don't have many choices, you owe them a debt of gratitude. And that gratitude is paid in my way of thinking in terms of investing in that person. Where do you want to be in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years' time? How can we invest in you so that you can do the best job possible now, but invest in you so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to be a senior leader in this organization? Or, by the way, Keenan, another organization. We lose people oftentimes for promotional opportunities. I don't see it like that. I see it that we've developed somebody who is good enough to be a leader somewhere else in our community where there is massive need. If you look at it like that, you don't get bitter and twisted about people leaving. You just hope they'll come back someday. And that really is the definition for me of what a preferred employer is. Somebody who is, from the day you walk in, we celebrate you. If somebody had put me in this position when I was 30, I would have lasted 3 days. It's a lifetime of blows. It's a lifetime of failures. It's a lifetime of learning. It's a lifetime of expanding your empathy, making sure that you think about where people are coming from before you judge them.
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Hart and Hustle Podcast. I'm incredibly excited to bring this brand new episode to you guys today because I have Peter Evers with me here today, who is the president and CEO of BAMSI, B-A-M-S-I, a nonprofit organization in the behavioral health and human services space that's doing about $115 million per year. Now, the BAMSI mission is really simple. Our mission is to meet each other, or to meet each person where they are, to help them learn, grow, and thrive. Peter, thank you for thank you for joining us on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Keenan. Thank you very much for thinking of me and inviting me.
Absolutely. So I want to start off today's episode on a little bit of a contrarian statement. In 2004, you had a mentor tell you to shut up and reminded you that you're fighting for people's lives. You said that had a huge impact on the way in which you approach the work that you do, but also your leadership style as well. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. It's funny because your entire life and work is sort of made up with small moments in some ways, and those moments are they might be. They might not be important at the time, but they tend to be. And sometimes you can be insulted by something that you will remember for a lifetime because of the wisdom that comes with it. And that's what happened with me, actually. I was working for a nonprofit in Boston, organization called Epidemic, which actually was the first women's hospital in America, and also had the first Black female doctor who was an obstetrician. So a lot of history there, wonderful history. And my mentor at the time was Jackie Jenkins Scott, and she was a woman of color who had worked in the field. And I was complaining one day about the state not giving us funding for something. And she just looked at me, and I could tell she was going to say something momentous. And what she said was, "Shut up," as you said. And I sort of tilted my head like a quizzical dog and said, "Why are you telling me to shut up?" And she said, "Because this work is all about fighting. This work is fighting for every dollar. Nobody is going to put a pot of gold on your doorstep and say, spend it as you want. Just remember, you're fighting for people. And these people have had nothing. And you're trying to redress that. And everything you do is about social justice." And it was, I think, probably the most I've always known that, but the way that she put it so succinctly and so brutally in some ways has always struck me. And, I've never had the chance to tell her that, but I'm actually going to see her at a celebration that's going to happen in October. And I can't wait to remind her of that.
Well, this episode will be out as well, so you should definitely share it with her as well.
She's an amazing woman.
It's really cool to think about how certain people have such a gigantic impact on our lives by telling us to do the work that is necessary. That was incredibly refreshing when I was reviewing our first conversation. And that really stuck in my mind because I feel like that message of shut up and do the work that is necessary, fight for the people who can't fight for themselves, is more needed, especially in the community based mental behavioral health and human services space. I want you to spend a couple minutes talking about the overall impact and challenges that your organization is facing in your community and how are we navigating those challenges.
Yeah. Those challenges, Keenan, I don't think of that much different. They're just sort of repackaged challenges if you think about it. And we have all of these things in front of us, like technology, for instance, that I'm sure we'll talk about in a little while, that come and help us with these things. But if you actually look at what we're facing basically a culture that has a great divide between poverty and wealth that stretches across race, but particularly in terms of different parts of the country. And in fact, you can, in Boston, it's a good example, you can have poverty on one side of the river, and on the other, you can have the best neonatal and postnatal hospital in America, perhaps. Yet, you're looking at mortality rates for babies that are equivalent from a third world country. So that sort of, we begin in many ways with injustice. And so fighting for that isn't always the most popular thing to do. I'll give you an example. We do a lot of work with people who struggle with the disease of addiction. It's really hard to raise money for that. It's really hard to get a good rate for that because there's so much stigma that goes with it. Many Americans to this day, even though there isn't a family in America not touched by addiction, believe that there is a choice there in addiction, and sort of unraveling some of that conventional wisdom is a job that I think we've been doing for years. We're still doing it. We are always going to be underfunded, and that's how we kicked off. But you've got to employ curiosity about this. You've got to employ a different way of looking at it. You've got to say, I can complain and I can whine about things, but these rates will never give me everything I want. So the job really is to make sure that you're using your resources as well as you can, as efficiently as you can. A lot of people say, well, it must be easy to work in the nonprofit sector. And I've heard that a number of times. It's a different kind of hard, Keenan. You have a certain amount of money and you have to provide services for a number of people. And in your heart and in your soul, you know that you don't want to leave anybody behind. And we still struggle with that, and we still advocate, and we still go down to the state house every so often and rattle cages and say, this is a priority. And then you look around and there's another 100 people saying this is a priority. So being quiet about what your mission is not going to get you anywhere. You've got to really take to the streets, advocate. And we've always done that. And that remains a difficulty with us. And the last thing I would say about that really, Kevin, is when we have a downturn in the economy, and we're a boom and bust economy, there's no doubt about it. The first thing that gets cut, the first thing, are services to the poor, services to people who have mental illness. We've just seen it in my own country, 14 years of a government who have just been pushing austerity down the throats of people who don't have anything, while other people do okay. You've got to be in it for the long haul, and you've really. Heart and Hustle is such a good name for this because you hustle all the time, and it's because you have the heart to do the work.
I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I had a guest recently on the podcast. He is a CEO and a leader of a nonprofit organization called Child and Family Focus. And it's out of North Carolina. And the one thing that he brought to the conversation was the mission of nonprofit leaders today is being challenged more so than ever. Did you know that there are extremely high levels of burnout with nonprofit CEOs? Now, when we had that conversation, that kind of struck my heart in an interesting factor because I thought about the responsibility to show up and advocate for others every single day. And often our nonprofit leaders don't get the encouragement and recognition for the great services that they leverage. So my question for you, Peter, is how are you avoiding those feelings of burnout, knowing that you're fighting such a consistent uphill battle with all the challenges that you're facing in your community, but also in other communities as well?
It's such a good question. And there is the potential for burnout. And as I said before, life is not just seen as this long continuum. It's there are some days where you think, I don't know how much longer I can do this, and then something happens in that day. We had, for instance, it was our annual golf tournament yesterday, and we put on the tournament, and we have lots of people who give us money, and it's really very nice. The best thing about it was that we had two of our person served, and I participate in our person served advisory board. I know so many of them, and they are so inspiring. And Stephen got up and he made a speech to all of the golfers at the end, appreciating them and talking a little bit about what it was like to be born with such severe handicaps that left him having to be in a brace for the rest of his life, and seeing what he's made of that, but also seeing what we collectively have done to help that person on that journey. Those little moments are gold. And sometimes we decide to work in fields where there isn't much recognition, and there isn't a big successful moment, isn't it? Like when you like win a championship or something like that. And the sooner you recognize that, I think the better you avoid burnout. But one thing that I think I like to do is be in the mix. Be getting to know the people we serve, getting to know our staff, being at staff meetings, hearing from people what it's like to live on a low income, working 2 and 3 jobs. And to be honest with you, that's how I began. I came to this country. I think in a pre-interview, Keenan, I told you I was a really great planner, because we arrived in this country, pregnant and without a house, without a job, and there's nothing that focuses you like that in terms of, well, you better get your act together. But it's hard. You take on the bottom of the ladder, or the first step on the ladder, you're going to be paid $19 an hour in a country that is experiencing extraordinary inflation, and you've got a lot to learn. I always remember that. I always like to sort of speak to people about that, and I always hope that I can be an influence that allows people to see, there's a pathway for everybody. And I absolutely understand that pathway is more difficult for some people, and I think that keeps me humble. And it's hard to burn out when you know that you're working to support all of those people and the people that we're serving. It's easier to get burned out if you lose direction, and if you become more separated from the mission. You talked about mission to begin with. You've got to have your eye on the mission, and when you focus on the mission, laser light, and you focus on your vision to get there, and you have a strategic plan that helps you along the way, that incremental change can seem enormous at times. And I'll give you an example. We had our QI meeting today, quality improvement meeting. Our overall scores in terms of quality, the appreciation of the people who use our services, are increasing 6.8% year over year over the last 3 years. That is real progress. If you think where we were 3 years ago, deep in COVID, and yet we have people so dedicated that they're improving the lives of people. It's hard to be burned out when you hear that. It's hard to be burned out when you think, wow, I've played some small part in that. And I think that keeps me going. And I don't think you have to have a history of doing the work to be the leader of an organization. But in my case, it's really, really helped me along the way, because there is some authenticity about that. And it's a really, really hard job to be a clinician, or to be a third shift residential worker with people who need attention to their physical needs all the time. It's a really, really tough job.
In our previous conversation, you told me about a story when you were a child. You would go down to, I'm going to call it the fishing harbor, and you would see a sign that says hands wanted. In our previous conversation, you talked about how instrumental that sign was, because you recognized they wanted hands to fulfill a job. But you have a different culture in your organization where you're trying to attract the whole person. Let's talk about the difference. Let's start off with that story, first of all, because people need to hear that. And let's talk about the difference of how you're attracting the whole person to come work with your organization.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, by an accident of birth, I was born in a place called Hull, and there are many Hulls, as I've decided, but the British one's the original. But in the 1980s, 70s, it was the biggest fishing port in the world, actually. And so down at the docks, there were a lot of companies, fishing companies. And when I would ride my bike down, my dad was on the trawlers and he was in the Navy. And when I would drive my bike down to the docks, there would be a sign on each of the trawler owners' uh, buildings that said hands wanted. And it just struck me as a really strange thing to put, but it's a pretty common thing in England that all they need is the hands, right? And it really made me think at an early age. I'm not sure if I want to work with someone, who just wants my hands. And I will tell you, Keenan, as I told you before, my dad said, "You are not going to see." I mean, it was a very dangerous. It still is. I think it has the highest mortality of any job being on the trawlers, and back then you can imagine it was pretty bad. Many of the trawlers didn't come home, so it didn't take much persuading me that I wouldn't go to sea, but I carried that with me really, and it's really a philosophy you should always have, especially of course in times when it's difficult to hire people because you want to be a preferred employer. But this is applicable at any given time. When somebody walks through the door, you owe them a debt of gratitude if they're going to work in your organization. Even if they don't have many choices, you owe them a debt of gratitude. And that gratitude is paid in my way of thinking in terms of investing in that person. Where do you want to be in 6 months, in a year, in 5 years' time? How can we invest in you so that you can do the best job possible now, but invest in you so that 5 years from now, 10 years from now, you're going to be a senior leader in this organization? Or, by the way, Keenan, another organization. We lose people oftentimes for promotional opportunities. I don't see it like that. I see it that we've developed somebody who is good enough to be a leader somewhere else in our community where there is massive need. If you look at it like that, you don't get bitter and twisted about people leaving. You just hope they'll come back someday, and that really is the definition for me of what a preferred employer is. Somebody who is, from the day you walk in, we celebrate you. You don't. Everybody remembers a day when they came to start their new job and there was nothing for them. The supervisor was out for the next week. You didn't know what to do. You didn't have all the equipment that you needed. And you just think, what? Am I really going to stay here if they care that little about me? On the other hand, we all remember a day where there's a big welcome Keenan sign, as you walk in, and somebody buys you a cake or something like that. Those things are really important. And we move from hands wanted to we want the whole of you, and you can have the whole of us and what we can offer you so that you can grow in this career. Because there's many reasons why people leave, Keenan, and many of them leave because they can't afford to feed their families. And so they'll go and get another job somewhere else. It really is making sure that we let them know that we care about all of them and their families and everything they bring into work, because you don't leave your problems at the doorstep when you cross the threshold of your employee.
Train them so good that they can leave, but treat them so good that they don't.
Totally.
One of my favorite leaders is a younger female CEO of a family office. And she says, "Don't judge me on the results of what we do here, but judge me on the results of how much my team has grown around me." And I feel like over the recent years, we've seen a huge paradigm shift where a lot of people say we were in the recent years in an employer's market. Now we're in an employee market. And we say that with pride. But one of the things that I think about in 2022, the Surgeon General came onto a national broadcast and said the biggest problem that is facing our society today is not another outbreak of a virus and a pandemic, but an epidemic of isolation and loneliness. Deep down in my heart, Peter, I truly believe that there is a deep yearning for people to find a sense of connection and the word family, I'm going to use that intentionally, in the work that they do. Why? Because it doesn't seem like we're getting it in our personal and our social lives, because it seems like although we might be together, because of things like this little device, we often find ourselves isolated and alone. And I think great organizations and great leaders like you are the future of building business culture here in the United States again, to have people be proud to be a part of an organization that has an amazing mission and a group of people that they do great work with again. And I'm really hopeful for the future, but I don't feel like a lot of people have that intuitive, I would say, perspective on where I think we're going.
Yeah, I know. I read that Vivek Murtry piece, the Surgeon General, and of course he's back as a Surgeon General, and he's wonderful. And it really is, it gives you pause for thought. And initially, when I read that, Keenan, I thought, oh, well, he's talking about elders, and we have a problem in this country about how we treat our elders. And, you only have to go to some other countries, not mine, by the way, not Britain, because we don't do a good job with it either. But, oddly, Russia, for instance, they hold their elders in great esteem. But it's not just that, is it? It's, I was working up in New Hampshire, and 50% of the young people who were in jobs in New Hampshire felt lonely and isolated. And New Hampshire had a real problem because young people were just getting the hell out of town. They just didn't want to stay in the state. And I think it is, we can blame everything, I suppose, on the supercomputer that we have in our left hand, all the time. But we got to do better as a society in making and giving people opportunities for fellowship, I would say. And, our work is very stressful. And we have to give people the ability. I'll give you an example. We've just changed the way that we bring people into the organization. During COVID, I'm sure everybody's did the same thing. We had Teams and Zoom orientations. So I would be on a Monday morning staring at a Celebrity Squares group of people, and it was fine. But we've gone back to, we changed our orientation process entirely. And now every other week, people come in for 4 days to get their training. And it's pretty intense. But the best thing that happens in that group is they are a cohort. They spend time together. You go in initially and everybody's staring at their phones and nobody's talking to each other. You throw them a bone of a conversation. Like I used to do this. I said, think of a time when when you had a customer service interaction that was awful, and then think of one that was really good. And I'm not getting, everybody should do this. Get people together. People who don't want to talk to each other, you can't stop them talking about it by the time they've finished. Everybody loves to talk about that kind of thing. I remember the Verizon guy. Sorry, Verizon. I didn't mean to. but usually it's about your TV service or whatever. But bringing people together, creating a cohort. I think I did tell you when I first came to this country in 1990. Without a house or a job, and when I finally got a job with the state, I was in a cohort of probably 23 people, and the commissioner of child protection came and talked to us and made me feel really important. That 3 of the people I was in that class with, in September the 23rd, 1990, are still my close friends. And
Wow.
that is what we're trying to create here. It's not just a place to come. It's a place to meet. Most of the relationships that happen, romantic relationships that happen, in life, not most of them, a significant proportion of them come from the workplace, right? Why are we fighting that? Why? I mean,
Great point.
it's where people learn to love, right? I mean, in difficult circumstances, learning the same thing. I mean, it's a passionate thing, and why should we look down on that? Why shouldn't we just be saying this is a place where, I mean, I don't know if you remember Ashley Madison, which was the website that encouraged people to cheat on each other. There was a big scandal
Yeah.
about it. But and I would encourage anyone to watch that documentary because it's absolutely brilliant. But their sideline was, our main competition is the workplace. Well, the workplace is where people get to know people and fall in love. And why should we fight against that? And we should absolutely make sure that people have the ability to come together, to know each other, to become friends. Because most of my friends are people that I've met through work. So, change that. I say change that perspective a little bit on work.
I mean, how much time do we spend working? You know what I mean? If you're showing up as a leader of your organization, you're probably showing up early and leaving late. And team members who are fully bought in are often doing the same thing. It's a huge portion of our lives. I always have had a little bit of an intuitive rub against the idea that work is bad. That's a lot of the social media narrative and other things that we see in the media. People don't want to work anymore. But if you think about finding passion and finding love in the things that you do, the cheesy saying is when you love what you do, you don't work a day in your life.
That's right.
And it's an interesting perspective, with the duality of an amazing mission that you guys have at your organization. How do you think about the difference of work-life balance? And here's a little framework that I like talking about. When you love what you do, it's not work-life balance, because that's a really tough game, but rather it's work-life integration. And you have to figure out how life integrates into your work and vice versa.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's tough, isn't it? And there's a generational rub with that as well, I think. But Keenan, I don't like to talk about generational differences, because, people make all sorts of observations about millennials, for instance, right? Well, do you have that observation about millennials who joined, the Army and the Navy and the Air Force and fought for our country? I don't buy into it. But I do think that younger places in your life, you're more likely to want to have a work-life balance or integration, as you say. I do think it is important. I think it's important that you don't neglect your family. I mean, of course, when you're the poorest in your life, usually is when you have babies, right? Which I always thought that's really unfair. It should be like Benjamin Button, you get your money early on, and then
You're so true.
But yeah, and that was my experience. I had an overnight job. I had 3 jobs because we had no money. And you got to be. There's a line of a wonderful song. Called "When You're My Age" by Laurie McKenna, and right at the end of the song, she says, "And I hope you don't work too much overtime, and I hope you spend it with your kids." That is true, but as you say, I think if you find your passion, it is integration. But we don't want people working 80 hours a week. It isn't good for you. It doesn't matter how much you love it, and you really do need to strive for it. And there can be times, I think, when there are differences of opinion about age. But that's all it is. It's not generational. I think it's where people are on the continuum of their own journey in life.
Well, Peter, don't you think it's so easy for the generation that had judgment cast upon them to then say, it is just for me to cast judgment on the next generation? I feel like we see this cycle. And I often have these conversations on the podcast about, I wish it was more appropriate for us to think about the 3 fingers that are pointed back at you when you point a finger at somebody else. You know what I mean? There's a sense of accountability that comes back with that. You point a finger at somebody else, you better look at the 3 coming back at you. And if we're going to be able to break some of these generational cycles of casting judgment, like millennials, right? 8th place trophies was a big one when I was coming up. Then we talked about Gen Z not being able to have conversations and technologically, overindulgent. Gen Alpha is going to have the same thing. It's conversations like this that help us get ahead of that curve. And I love the stance that you talk about not casting judgment on other generations, because it doesn't serve anybody.
Well, does it make people feel better about themselves? I don't know. I mean, but I will say, and I won't say where it was, but I remember in a job that I had a while ago, the CEO thought it was great to bring somebody in to talk about cross-generational working. And this person came, they were probably in their mid-50s, and she did nothing but tear down millennials. And by the way, the vast majority of people, the biggest workforce group now is millennials, right? As it was then. And they were getting up and walking out. And she just kept on going about all of these stereotypes about millennials. And I just thought, well, we're probably going to lose a percentage of the workforce because you indulged yourself in, a conversation that maybe made you feel better. And it's just, it's false. It's not real. We're humans. We're all humans. And some of us work really hard. Some of us work less. Some of us ambitious. Some of us not so ambitious. Some want to help people. Some want to make money. It's the same through time.
There's 2 ways to build the biggest building in town. One is to tear down the other buildings around you. The other is to actually build the biggest building in town. And I prefer to do the latter.
Yeah.
You're touching on a sense of self-awareness there, which I feel like is an amazing soft skill that we need to develop, not only in our leaders of today, but also in the next generation of leaders as well. How do you emphasize or practice your honed sense of self-awareness? Because I love the way in which you kind of navigate this conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think most of what you do, I think leadership is a really interesting point. And I was thinking about it the other day, and, curiosity is something that goes throughout your whole life, but your innovation period, for instance, isn't something that you carry into your 50s and 60s necessarily, right? In the hospital where I worked, they used to call the old docs silverbacks, right? And I love that expression because those are the gorillas who are the leaders of the pack.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. That's our logo is a gorilla for exactly that strength,
Oh,
right?
right, right. Oh, but it's such a wonderful expression, is it? These are the silverbacks. They've seen it all before. They've been through residency. They understand that. And they're always the people that you come to say, I've got this thought and I don't know if it's stupid, but will you hear it? And the good silverback is that, yeah, let's hear it. Because in some ways, for instance, have passed my innovation phase. And my phase now is exactly, is much more about bringing on and helping people with their not with their innovation, but their application of their innovation. They're selling it to people, their soft skills. And I had no soft skills when I started this, and I sort of look back and cringe at some of the things I said when I had my first leadership job. If somebody had put me in this position when I was 30, I would have lasted 3 days. It's a lifetime of blows. It's a lifetime of failures. It's a lifetime of learning. It's a lifetime of um, expanding your um, empathy, making sure that you think about where people are coming from before you judge them. We just had an interview and with somebody, and they were wonderful, but they haven't lived enough of that life to be able to be that mentor and be that person. Now, it's not really about age, Keenan, but I think it's a lot about age. But when you see yourself as somebody who is more of a teacher and a mentor, that means I think that you're just in a different phase. And being able to teach people soft skills is possible, I believe. And we spend a lot of time here um, doing, we do new supervisor boot camp, which is, how to fill out timesheets and things like that. We pay equal attention to, look, these are the people that are coming into this field they have a passion. You just need to bring it out. And you need to keep asking them and referencing them. How are they doing? And what's floating your boat and what's sinking it? And and what are your thoughts and what are your ideas? I mean, so many of our best ideas come from the shop floor. They come from people who have done the work before, and giving people a pathway. We just had a listening session today. That we had 60 something people in. It was great. Anybody can say anything that they want to say. People get used to, and by the way, in workplaces, people's first thought is, if I say something negative, it's going to count against me. You can change the culture so that people can say things that are on their mind without any fear of retribution. You're really moving in the right direction, because your best ideas, run this by the field, see what they think about it. And I haven't done that before, and I paid the price for it. So it's that experience of failure, I think, that helps you, really work with people and develop their soft skills. And there's nothing like being a mentor. I mean, I find it extraordinarily helpful to me, and helpful to me in my journey.
It's a really interesting maturation process. I can't tell you how many leaders, and I ask the question, what is the most fulfilling part of your work? And it's not the impact that we're having in the community, but it's how I'm seeing my team grow and blossom around me, because I know that I'm doing right by them, and they are bringing ideas with curiosity. They're willing to have healthy conflict to help us get different perspectives. Have you ever heard the saying, if you want to go fast, go by yourself? If you want to go far, go with the team?
Yeah, it's absolutely true. And there's so many examples in my lifetime that where putting in a new HR system, and the HR department, and this is years ago, the HR department says, we know this, we're the HR professionals, without asking the field, how is this going to impact you? Now, if you can end up with the product that nobody uses, and I question the utility of that. But if you bring people along, it's going to take you longer, but people embrace it. And, somebody once said to me, the greatest trick about management is allowing people to know that it's their own idea. And there's a little cynicism in that, but it's absolutely true, right? Allow people to think, yeah, I thought of that. And there's no ownership in success.
I mean, if I think about some of the greatest sports teams that I've ever grown up watching, it was the players on the court or the players on the field that got the job done. It wasn't the head coach that was saying, see what I did at the end of the year. It was all the guys who were on the court doing the things and making the plays. And I feel
Yeah.
like that's a beautiful analogy.
Yeah.
One of the things I do want to talk a little bit about is diving a little deeper into that sense of curiosity. What got us here is not going to get us there.
Yeah.
How are you thinking about curiosity in the space of behavioral health and human services? What are some of the things that are kind of on the front of your mind as a leader who's kind of steering the ship these days?
Yeah. I mean, again, I don't think we move the rock without curiosity. And sometimes I think that big state agencies or big behemoth sort of industry lacks a little bit of curiosity, and partly because they're resting on their laurels. Partly it is, and that old adage, if somebody says we've always done it that way, when you ask why you do it, then they're wrong. And I think it's best to stick with that, right? Because that shows that there's a lack of curiosity, and it's easy to be drawn into that. I remember I got a job at Wimpy in England, which was the McDonald's of England. It's really bad, by the way. I'm sorry, Wimpy, but it's really not very good. But it was a job that I had in college, and I moved the apple pies into a different fryer later, and I got in trouble because you don't put the apples in there. And I said, but if you put the apple pie in with the fish, the fish thing, surely the apple pie a taste of fish. And they went, and they just said, you know what? I don't care about that. That's the way we do it. And I thought, well, you're not going to get the benefit of my inspiration then. but again, if we're not curious and we don't have an eye to how things work. If my dad was an engineer, and he always used to encourage me, and I wasn't very good at practical things, but he would constantly take things apart. There'd be a clock, and the clock would be in 1,000 pieces. And I would go, Dad, what are you doing? And he goes, oh, I just wanted to know how it worked. And I said, and you have the confidence to put that back together? And he said, yeah. And I thought, wow, that is the definition of a curious mind, right? That maybe you won't be able to put it back together, but you'll know how it works. And I think if we keep that curiosity, and by the way, you have to nurture it, right? You have to keep telling people to be curious, or else you get into a situation where you begin to make decisions that are so rigid they look ridiculous from the outside. So the ability to have somebody check in with you and say, have you really thought that this is a good idea? Surrounding yourself with people who can say, I wonder if you thought this way. Because individuals don't think of all the answers together. They think of them when you're spitballing, when everybody's equal, when you have what they call in operational excellence, kaizens. I love the idea of a kaizen. Everybody gets in a room, everybody's equal. We did one on time to clean the operating theater in the hospital. And it was the people that came in and did the cleaning that had all the answers. And we reduced it from 20 minutes to 10 minutes. And you can imagine that the efficiency that gave to the next person coming in, the next person. They were ending up doing 3 or 4 more procedures a day because of the time they spent. That's because there was a curiosity about how do we make that better, rather than saying 20 minutes, not bad. You can always do that. And it's curiosity that does that. And giving people the opportunity to make decisions and giving people the opportunity to fail. I mean, I learned, we all do, way more from screwing up. And another mentor of mine said, I came in one day, I don't know if I told you this before, Keenan, but I came in to the organization. I said, I've got this great idea, Mary. This is what we should do. And she just sort of put her hand up and she said, for you, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. And it was incredibly empowering to me. The reason she said that was because I'd earned her trust. I'd earned her trust by being curious. I'd earned her trust by asking a lot of questions about the way we did things, and by taking projects and fulfilling them. And some of them didn't work, by the way. But she knew, because she knew me quite well, that I would never do anything deliberately to harm the organization. And once you have that trust, that curiosity is given this fertile ground just to grow and grow. And people love it. People love to be curious when they're allowed to be. So it's all about having an open line of communication and not shutting anything down, just being, and it takes a little longer, right? And sometimes you're going to make a decision, or sometimes you're not going to go with that idea. But I honestly believe that all of our moving forward, all of our improvement is based in the curiosity of the human spirit, really.
The leader's ability to cultivate trust is a superpower. I mean, one of my favorite leaders that came from my generation was Mark Zuckerberg, right? The founder of Facebook. One of their core tenets when they were first getting Facebook off the ground was move fast and break things. Yeah. Because if you're not moving fast enough and breaking things, you're not pushing the boundaries enough. And I feel like when you can cultivate that environment, it creates so much opportunity for exploration and fulfillment in the work that you do. I want to harp on what you said there because I want the audience to really tune in on this. The willingness to create an environment to help people fail forward. What an amazing element. I'm not sure if you've ever been familiar with the work of Carol Dweck. She's a PhD from the University of Stanford. She pioneered the idea of a growth mindset. Yeah. A growth mindset is about continuous improvement. And one of the things that she uses in her book, where she talks about the growth mindset in general, she says, there's examples when children will come home and they'll say, I got all A's on my test this week, Dad. And the dad responds, that's great, but it sounds like you're not being challenged enough because you're not getting things wrong. Let's remember, getting things wrong and not bad, but always look for that next level of adoption, that next level of progression. And that comes from being willing to set up the mindset that comes with willing to fail forward. Yeah. I've been failing for the last 10 years as an entrepreneur. And the lessons that have been the most impactful were the mistakes that I made because I never made them again. Right. It's better to mess up and understand why than to win and not understand. And that in itself is a beautiful message as well.
Yeah, and actually, it flows beautifully into the work we do as well with people with developmental disabilities and with severe and persistent mental illness. 2 or 3 generations ago, nothing was expected of those people. Nothing. So they weren't allowed to try to do anything. Now, we've totally changed that around. We teach sexuality for people who have developmental disabilities. And so we should, because this is the human experience, right? How do you manage that? There are plenty of people that live in our homes who enjoy lovely relationships because we're allowed to do that. And they also suffer the pain of losing a relationship as well. Again, the human condition. And we call that the dignity of risk. Everybody should be allowed to take risks. And, people talk about risks, and there's a little bit of hypocrisy about risk in this country, right? For all of those people, for all of the Bill Gates and all of the Steve Jobs, there were thousands and thousands of people who went into that business who probably were as bright, who took those risks, and they failed. There is the possibility of failure in life. And if you don't face up to that, what you said before, if you win and you win and you win, you're never going to experience that, and you're never going to learn what that feels like. It also increases your ability to empathize with people as well. It also really concentrates on what you have and the privileges that you have. And if you can put that in perspective of your failures and your successes, I think you begin to understand other people a lot better. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the dignity of risk is something that applies to all of us.
As you've gotten a little bit older, when you think about the things that you regret, and this is a little bit of a personal question, kind of off our framework here, do you think about the things that you tried and maybe failed, or the biggest regrets, the things that maybe you didn't do?
Yeah, it's such a great question. Daniel Pink has written about this, and he's just such a wonderful communicator, and it struck a chord with me. I was at the National Council of Mental Wellness last year, and he was talking about it. I have many regrets, and those regrets make up the fabric of my life, which is really funny when you hear all these songs that say, Edith Piaf sang Je regrette rien. How can you regret nothing? How do you live if you regret nothing? It's a false concept of humanity. Um, and I do. I mentioned before, I've behaved in ways that are not becoming to a human being because because I've been selfish, because I haven't considered the feelings of others, because I've had uh, bad ideas that I didn't run by people. But I've also have regrets about things that that could have gone better, but I'm glad that I did them. I know that's a bit of a weird way of coming at it, but regret for me is something that inspires our ability and drive to try again and to try and succeed and to pick up the pieces of whatever that regret is and then put them back. And then there's personal things that happen in your life. Like a failed relationship, for instance, that is a natural regret, and to not regret that, for instance, is not human. And so I see it as a very important motivating fact in self-improvement. And so regret is on the table for me. It's a very important thing.
It is. There was an experiment that was run by a psychologist. He had 6,000 people. He asked a simple question to. He said, think of one of the worst experiences that you've ever had in your life. If you had the option to remove that experience from your life, but at the same time, you also removed everything that came because of that experience, would you eliminate that from your life? 99% of those people said no,
Absolutely.
because the experiences that we go through, they build us, they make us, they are our entire life experience. And without, I was fortunate enough in the future, I'll be moving back to Hawaii, and
Oh,
it's known
nice.
as the Rainbow State, right? And the one
Yeah.
thing that I recognize there, as silly and as cheesy as it sounds, but you cannot have a rainbow without the rain. And that is one of the most beautiful things that of living there is you see all these dark clouds that come, but on the other side of that cloud is a beautiful rainbow.
Yeah.
And it's the duality of life there, which I think
Yeah.
is beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very nicely put. And anyway, you often think about people who. Oh, it's fun. I'll tell this story, but I was at a I was at a meeting the other day, and I met somebody who is second generation wealth, right? So their father had built this business, and this particular individual said to me, "You have no idea how difficult it is being the child of somebody who started a business and then you inherit it." And I thought, I could think of a number of things more difficult than that, my friend. you know, uh, Not that I want to put myself in your position, but isn't that a great privilege rather
It
than
is. I mean, but Peter, let's think about it this way. Imagine growing up and living a life knowing that you didn't have to work to accomplish anything.
right?
And if I think about my own personal experience, it's the times of struggle that build us to be the people who we are. Gary Vaynerchuk, I shared a book in our last conversation together. He talks about this all the time. The people who are the worst off are often the ones who are blessed with everything because they never know the contrast of life. And I would hate to find myself in the situation where I've got everything in the world that I want, but I'm still unhappy, because then it means the unhappiness comes from here. It's not
Yeah,
out here. And that's a
yeah.
scary accountability to kind of deal with.
I think Keenan. That is such a wise thing to say. It's funny, just sort of popular culture wise. You probably remember last year when Johnny Depp was in court every day with Amanda, somebody I can't remember what her name
Mm-hmm.
was, but it struck me that like both of these people were beautiful people, and they had probably wealth beyond my imagination, and had been so successful in so many things, yet they found a way to be miserable. And it's our responsibility, right, to tackle that and to take on our misery and to grow, and it's also our responsibility to lift up those people and help them through that. But it was one of those things that struck me. Wow, you can have everything in your life and you can still be this miserable and hate each other so much. That's just really sad.
I mean, I often think about something called the hero's journey. if you think about the stories that are the most popular through time, the Epic of Gilgamesh, all these different stories that we see, it's always about the hero's journey, which is coming from nothing, building yourself, and accomplishing great things. When you ask some of the richest people, some of the most successful people in the world, would you give it all up to go back and be a kid again? They often say, absolutely, I would, because it was the journey where you find the fulfillment. There's a beautiful book, and I'm not sure if you've ever heard it. There's an individual named Mike Sullivan, or Dan Sullivan is his name. He's an executive coach. The name of the book is called The Gap in the Gain. And he says the one thing that high achieving mindsets often find themselves falling trapped to is their mindset is always in the gap. Now, the gap is where you are right here and the thing that you're trying to accomplish, the finish line. And he uses the horizon as the finish line. He said, if you've ever been a high achiever, you're where you're at right now, but you always think about the gap from where you are to where you're trying to get to. Yeah. And if you ever run, sprint, drive in a car, or fly in a jet towards the horizon, you can never catch it. Yeah. The inverse of that is a practice of gratitude called the gain. If you turn around and see how far you've come to get where you at, you have a completely different perspective in where you are in this moment. And I feel like it's so beautiful to really pause and think about the gain. And I want you to kind of use this moment to think about all the things that you've accomplished, Peter. The journey of coming over to the United States with a pregnant wife, with a pregnant partner, not having a job, finding it out, all the accomplishments, all those small steps that you've made have made you the person who sits in front of me today. And that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as I've already described, there were so many people that helped me along the way. So many people who were willing to share with me what they thought. And, you know, it's funny because I have a friend who has been in recovery for 50 years now. She's in her 80s. And she has a lovely, I used to work with her at Epidemic in Roxbury in Boston. And when I first met her, I was in her office, and there's a little saying on the door, and it says, the people who need love the most of all often appear to deserve it the least. And that is so true, if you ask me. So I think I have a fairly friendly, sort of outlook on life, and I engage with people relatively well. And I was able to benefit from that because people were more willing to help me, I think, because of that. That doesn't mean that a person who's not quite engaging, that is gruff and not engaging, doesn't deserve that kind of attention as well. And I have many privileges, and I've utilized those, and I'm very grateful for all of the help that I got along the way, because nobody gets anywhere without a ton of people holding you up, and that is. Unless you're King Charles, who's the King of England, which is weird, then then there's a 1,000 people that have helped you on that journey.
I want to use the last couple seconds here for you to tell us, over the next 1, 2 to 3 years, what are we hoping for your work that you're doing with your organization and just the nonprofit sector who's serving human services and behavioral health? What are we hoping for over the next couple of years?
Well, I mean, I think part of it is making use of your size. I mean, it is true that, there are going to be less and less nonprofits around, and those are going to be bigger and bigger. And that's sort of what the state want to do. There's a real sense of loss in that, by the way, especially, in terms of diversity, in terms of lingual diversity, in terms of, minority-owned businesses, that kind of thing. But we have to be able to leverage some of our size in order to get contracts that are worthy of the people that we serve. Any nonprofit should have a mission to serve as many people as you could possibly do. And we're a multi-service agency, so we better provide a lot of services. We provide 120 different services in 110 different places. And each one of those is wonderfully crafted to the needs of that population. The needs of this population aren't going to disappear in the next 5 years, 10 years, 3 generations, 4 generations. We are always going to need to be around. And as long as we remain fiscally strong, as long as we remain able to advocate and change the minds of the politicians and the people that have the purse strings, we need to get better at that. And as long as we're doing that, we're going to be relevant in this space. The worst thing that could happen to us is to remain the same and become irrelevant to the people that we serve. We always have to innovate. We always have to elevate. We always have to be striving for quality scores that are better than last year, because if we're not, and you're sitting on your laurels, you're going backwards. There's much work to be done. There's different work to be done. You think about the number of kids that are being diagnosed with autism syndrome now. We've got to change. We've got to be able to provide services for a big population. I don't think autism is more prevalent in our society. I think we're just better at identifying it. So, look out for new opportunities, because new opportunities, new problems are opportunities that come along for us. Remain curious, and keep passing along hope, and healthy optimism. I mean, you cannot be a pessimist in this field. You have to have your chin up all the time, and you have to be able to pass that along to people and make them feel that there's hope. Harvey Milk was one of my favorite characters, political characters, said, you can't fix everything with hope, but without it, you fix nothing. And that really stuck with me, and it is absolutely true in the work that we do.
Peter, one of the traditions we have here on the podcast is closing by having a previous guest ask you a question. Their question was, who inspired you to do what you do?
Well, it goes back to my mom. My mother was a nurse. She was a health visitor. She was a midwife. She worked 3 jobs, and knew. I remember I asked her once. I said, "When did you first realize you wanted to be a nurse?" And she said, "I don't know. I was 5 years old, I think." Somebody like that, who dedicated their life to, as she called it, catching babies, was somebody who really, I think, set me on my way. It was ironic, really, because my father told me, don't do what I did, but my mother's never told me to do what she did. But I think it was I think that there was a blueprint there, and so I think it began there. But Keenan, as I said before, you meet people who inspire you in a little way or a big way every day, and all of those things add up to the point where I thought, well, what else am I going to do? And another one of my bosses once said to me, and it was a real backhand compliment, but she said, she's never leave this field. And I said, why? And she goes, because you're not good at anything else. You're just good at this. And I guess that's all I've known. So,
I mean, Peter, I just want to say once again, man, thank you for everything that you're doing, leading from the front, building the next generation, fighting for those who can't raise their hand and don't have a voice. Your hard work and effort does not go unrecognized, my friend. So thank you once again for joining the show. For everybody who's watching and listening, that's been an episode again of the Hart Hustle Podcast. Peter Evers, thanks, man. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Keenan. Great questions too. Thank you.